Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Stillman here with Amy Arp and Clark Engelbert. And today we are going to be taking a moment to share with you some hot takes on aluminum toxicity and aluminum detox. So, Clark, you have been fascinated by aluminum for years. So I'm going to let you kick things off by telling everyone what is aluminum, why should we be concerned about it, and then we can get into a lot of the noise and confusion over aluminum detox and aluminum toxicity.
Okay, yeah, let's get going with this. Aluminum is the third most abundant element in the Earth's crust. It's a naturally occurring metal, and it's I would say gained a lot more prominence in the last 100, 200 years because of its ubiquitous use in industry for myriad different purposes, thousands of different purposes. Aluminum is used for in industry, in agriculture, for domestic purposes, in the manufacturing of buildings and cars, as an anti-caking agent. Aluminum is very, it's just very useful in industry. And so as industrialization has sort of continued apace the last couple hundred years, its demand and sort of suffusion in the environment is sort of unparalleled when we consider all of the other metals that are used in industry and for all these different purposes as well. And so aluminum, in my opinion, is the most biologically relevant of all of the heavy metals that exist, and maybe more so because it's more ubiquitous than all of the other metals combined. And the actual hard number that is sort of estimated for its use in the environment or its use in industry is about 132 million metric tons per year of aluminum for all of these different purposes that it is useful for. And so human beings now are exposed to aluminum at a rate that they would have never even, we could never even conceive of, even a couple hundred years ago. So what really this leads to is a lot of novel and weird modern diseases that could, at least in part, be caused by this aluminum ubiquity in the environment. And it works its way through the food chain. It's in the water supply intentionally. We can talk about all the different sources and what aluminum causes when it's in the body. But it sort of tracks along with this story of other metals in that, it's not exactly just one thing that maybe aluminum toxicity can cause. And there are...
take a moment to point out where aluminum is on the periodic table of elements. So it's right below boron and right next to silica. And it's really close to these transition elements in the middle. And this is one of the reasons why aluminum creates so many problems in biological living systems. It's not used, to my knowledge, Clark, you can correct me if you know otherwise, in any physiologic process anywhere on planet Earth. All living systems leave it in the Earth's crust. That's a big, giant clue that maybe it's not good for anything.
Exactly.
And if you understand anything about metallomics and metalloenzyme biochemistry, you understand that if a mineral that's necessary for a biochemical process is being displaced by an aluminum element, that's going to have an impact on your physiology. So aluminum is like one of the most insidious and yet potent toxins, I would say, on planet Earth, largely because it's toxidrome. People don't notice when they're getting exposed to significant amounts of aluminum. Very few, if any, people test it. We're some of the only people who test it regularly with our hair testing, which is why we have a hair testing course, obviously, which if you're watching this on social media, you can learn about at stillman&Aluminum or in the link below this video. And we see huge amounts of aluminum coming out of people. We just got a test back today on a case where someone started a huge elimination of copper and aluminum that coincided with the last 3 months of doing mineral balancing with us and starting some other supplement protocols. And the aluminum's coming out, the copper's coming out. And this is why we're raising awareness about this issue, because people get really turned around on how big of a problem this is, and they just think it's no big deal to be drinking out of aluminum cans every day, when in fact it's part of what's destroying modern civilization.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that you just got a test back today of someone eliminating aluminum. I got a lot of tests back yesterday, maybe 9 or 10 tests.
9 or 10 all at once? Wow.
Yeah, and about half the people are eliminating a lot.
I'm only getting 2 or 3 back a day.
I know. Come on, Dr. Stillman. So, but if you go like on my social media accounts, I do post a lot of these case studies and, back-to-back tests showing these eliminations. And most of them, I'd say 80% of them are aluminum eliminations. And to me, it's not that necessarily mineral balancing is a sort of specific modality that targets aluminum, but it's that aluminum is so ubiquitous in the environment. People have more aluminum than all the other metals, like by far. And so that's the metal that is being eliminated the most. And it goes to this concept of biological relevance and ubiquity of aluminum in the environment. And, at the end of the day, this story gets really interesting because we're really living through like a silent pandemic of subclinical heavy metal toxicity. And aluminum is the central player in that. And
what a great, that's like we hate fear mongering in general, but like Clark's not overstating it there. It is a silent, because I hate it when people are like, oh, we shouldn't even use that P word. The social media algorithms will smack us for.
Should we use the E word instead?
Endemic?
Epidemic.
No, I mean, it's anyway, whatever it is. The burden of aluminum is creating significant burdens of disease in the population.
Yes.
And the vast majority of scientists and physicians have their heads as deep in the sand on this one as possible, which is why their patients are doing horribly. The patient problem list is just growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. The patient medication list is growing, and they're wondering, when do I get off of this treadmill of pills and diagnostic tests and doctor's visits? And is it possible for me to live a normal, happy, healthy life ever again? The answer is yes. It's just not going to happen with the conventional medical approaches that completely ignore this giant problem that we see coming out of people's hair when we start to get them on the right protocols that cause them to push heavy metals out.
And why don't we talk about, what are, we could get into sources. That to me is not as interesting as people can look up sources of aluminum, whatever. It's in everything. And it's probably an easier exercise to ask the question of what is aluminum not in than it is to say, what is aluminum in? So what does aluminum cause, though, when it gets inside of you? That's an interesting question I think we can address. But then also, what are the elements? What are the essential elements that aluminum interacts with? That also gives us a clue into the different disease states and pathologic conditions that aluminum can contribute to. So the first thing that I would say, the most, I would say prominent thing that people know about that aluminum causes would be Alzheimer's and dementia in older folks. At a lower level in younger people with maybe less of an aluminum burden, you get memory problems, brain fog, forgetfulness.
But Clark, I heard that the aluminum and dementia hypothesis was debunked.
Yes, I'm sure it was by very financially, some very interested parties in the aluminum industry have said that. And,
Do you mean that scientists could be co-opted by financial interests, Clark?
I would never imply that. Scientists are perfect human beings, and they're and they're not subject to so
no bias at all.
You would even say something like that.
I know. I know. Shocking. It's amazing. Some people think that scientists can be bought.
Many of them are. And one scientist that is not bought is this remarkable guy named Chris Exley, who has done a lot of research in recent years looking at postmortem brain tissue of both Alzheimer's and autism folks' brains that have been donated to science, postmortem brains. people that have passed away. Their brains were donated to science. Chris and his team of researchers were able to actually do high level analytical techniques, the fluorescence microscopy on these brains, and actually illuminate the aluminum burden of these brains and show people tangibly that these people with Alzheimer's and autism have very high burdens of aluminum in their brain tissue. And what's sort of interesting about this is that, okay, well, aluminum can cause autism or Alzheimer's and dementia. And this sort of speaks to distribution of these metals, where they get into, can cause different problems. I have a really, really interesting case study of a family who have identical twin boys. They have identical hair tests, identical aluminum toxicity, born to the same mom, same vaccination schedule, same diet. Both boys have wildly different problems. And I've talked about this case a little bit with clients and on my own social media account, but I think it's worth reiterating that this is one of the most fascinating cases, and it helps to illuminate how metal toxicology or how metals toxicity can cause different problems. The same exact metal in the body of identical twins can cause different problems. And so the distribution of metals in the body is chaotic. And if you're exposed to even the same metal, like one of the boys has learning and developmental delays. The other boy, the other identical twin, has growth problems with his bones, and he's not quite as tall. He's got sort of a warped structure. And so to me, this is sort of speaking to aluminum is getting into the bone tissue in one of the boys. In the other boy, aluminum is getting into the brain and causing significant decrements in learning and memory and IQ and those sorts of things in development. And so the metals and their effects are what we call pleiotropic. They can cause any number of problems depending upon where they're distributed or directed to in the body, which is a chaotic process because there are no homeostatic control mechanisms for metals. And that's another really important point for people to understand. When metals get into your body, there's chaos in terms of like what the body does with that metal. So this speaks to, I think, another very important concept, that these metals can cause anything. And so it's not, totally relevant to go, well, we know aluminum causes this or that. Yes, there are strong correlations with Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, lowered IQ even, and there's good mechanisms behind that. But aluminum can get into the kidneys and cause kidney disease or kidney problems. Aluminum can get into your bones. Aluminum can get into your digestive tract and substitute for calcium on the small intestinal enterocyte cells, those villi cells that are responsible for absorbing nutrients and keeping bad stuff out. And so this aluminum problem, I think, illuminates a very interesting aspect of metals toxicology, which is that you can end up with anything if you're exposed to these metals. And avoiding exposure is sort of paramount, but then also not losing the forest for the trees when we sort of consider these issues. And it's not just aluminum that people are being exposed to. They're being exposed to a lot of other metals as well. So a lot of these metals sort of synergize with each other negatively and can cause more inflammation when taken together than individually even. So,
which is why the prevalence of so many diseases is rising inexorably. And of course, there's many other things we talk about that contribute to or cause illness, everything from man-made electromagnetic radiation to sound pollution to air pollution, water pollution. But by far and away, the most toxic elements or things on planet Earth are heavy metals. There are some chemical weapons agents that are more toxic than heavy metals.
Right.
But really, hopefully you're not exposed to concentrated doses of those.
Right, exactly. So I think it's also interesting to talk about the interactions of aluminum and the essential elements. Aluminum and iron are very similar. Aluminum and calcium are very similar. Aluminum and magnesium are very similar. aluminum and silica are very similar as well. And, aluminum being kind of close to all of those transition elements means that it can substitute for and displace many of them, those ones that I mentioned being the most prominent. And so if we understand like what those elements do in the body as well, we can also sort of shine a light on the toxicity of aluminum and what it causes. Aluminum can inhibit iron absorption. Right? Okay, aluminum has been shown to cause anemia for that reason, along with other metals, right? So it's not just aluminum, but a particular type of anemia can be caused by aluminum. Another really interesting and seemingly counterintuitive fact about aluminum is that it can stimulate transferrin receptors on your cell, causing more iron bioaccumulation as well. Right. And so a lot of people have iron toxicity issues. It could be related to this aluminum epidemic that we're all sort of living through, and what Chris Exley calls the aluminum age. That's really the age that we're living through right now because of aluminum's ubiquity. But so that's very interesting. If you have, let's just consider a hypothetical scenario with iron toxicity. Iron can stimulate transferrin receptors. Lead, if you have lead toxicity, lead inhibits ferroportin 1, which is an iron export molecule responsible for iron efflux from the cells. So if you have aluminum and lead toxicity at the same time, that actually may be driving serious iron toxicity in some people. So, this sort of, I think, speaks to these interactions between these elements and second and third order effects of these elements, and really what can result after being exposed to them.
Well, this is also why I think ferritin is such an interesting molecule, enzyme, if you want to call it that. I've spent a lot of time reading about ferritin because of its association with early morbidity and mortality. For those of you who don't know, look up my videos on iron overload, things like that. We've got a lot of those in the memberships at Stillman Wellness if people really want to learn all of the details behind that. So that's stillmanwellness.com, and our optimal wellness membership. We've got a lot of content around iron and iron overload. So the thing about ferritin that people don't realize is it's an enzyme that's created to essentially cage iron so that it doesn't run around the body, destroying everything with insane amounts of oxidative stress. And what people don't understand about this is that the ferritin itself doesn't necessarily have any iron in it. So one question might be, is ferritin increasing in value because of a burden of heavy metals on the body, right?
Exactly.
I haven't run down that rabbit hole very deeply, but you and I have talked about it, Clark, and mechanistically it makes all the sense in the world. And that's why I think we've never seen more people with iron. I mean, I see so many people who've got normal iron levels and anemia. It's insane. And they can't figure out why. They don't understand why it's not getting better. You and I have both talked about how these people do really, really well when you give them the right mix of nutrients and get them on the right protocol to detoxify the body. And you'll see these heavy metals come out that coincide with the improvements in the blood markers, which, no one is talking about, or no one really understands who's not doing this kind of work with the hair tissue testing and the mineral balancing protocols that we teach people in our course on mineral balancing. Yeah, absolutely. And so, aluminum, maybe a couple other mechanisms I would love to talk about because these fascinate me to no end. But like aluminum is very much associated with lowered IQ and attentional problems. And so when you say it's associated, do you mean like serum levels, urine levels? How did they study that?
Well, there are certain mechanistic studies like in animals, and cell culture models where they've shown that aluminum can bind to magnesium very tightly, and we know that magnesium is important for ATPase.
That's really odd. You mean bind to, or do you mean compete with?
Compete with, I meant. Sorry, but it has that interaction with magnesium, but we know that magnesium is important for ATPase, an enzyme that regulates ATP. This is one of the potential mechanisms, I think, wherein aluminum lowers brain energy and causes these cognitive deficits, right? And so That's number one. Number two is that aluminum can also disrupt calcium homeostasis. And in the brain, calcium is really important for calmodulin and protein kinase C, which are enzymes that regulate acetylcholine. And
which
so
for memory and cognition, for those of you keeping score at home.
Exactly. So there's another potential mechanism for where aluminum can disrupt cognition, focus, maybe ability to consolidate long-term memory, and those sorts of things, which are really important in these memory processes. So, and it's sort of interesting because aluminum has this inhibitory effect on these enzymes, whereas lead has a very stimulating effect. It can actually cause the overexpression of certain of these enzymes. And that's sort of another way that IQ could be lowered through that overactivation effect that lead has on those same enzymes. Aluminum has a more inhibitory effect for whatever reason. So lots of really interesting mechanisms there. But another one I try to, tell clients about that's a little easier to wrap their head around. It's more global in nature. The body and the brain is having to constantly adapt to the inflammatory presence of the metals. And this there's a significant energy cost to this constant having to adapt to the inflammatory presence of these metals. And that can lower your energy levels, can lower your brain energy. You can't think as quickly, cognition declines, and that can be sort of another more general way that aluminum can cause these brain problems.
And what kicked this whole topic off, why we decided to talk about it today, is we've gotten more and more questions about things like zeolite and other chemicals, compounds, supplements, functional foods, whatever you want to call them, that have aluminum in them. And we don't recommend these products generally or any particular brands because neither Clark nor I has been satisfied that they're not contributing to total body aluminum levels, even if people may notice anecdotal improvements with taking them, right? We also haven't found them necessary in order to trigger people's eliminations of aluminum from the body using diet and lifestyle changes that augment the body's detoxification capacity. So,
very important on this point. Metals, they silently bioaccumulate in these microgram, nanogram quantities. So for many of these products that potentially have aluminum or other metals in them, people might be getting a short-term benefit from whatever it is, whether it's protein powders, greens powders, whatever, zeolites, clays, you might get a short-term benefit. But the effects of these metals are not immediate. You can silently bioaccumulate metals for a decade before any symptoms or any clinical manifestation presents itself. So you could be silently bioaccumulating aluminum. When you take zeolites, you might go, wow, I feel great. Something in this is working. 10 years later, you might have kidney problems, or you feel like your memory is shot, cognition is worse, IQ is lower, and it's coming from the use of that aluminum. So this is part of and maybe I'll stay away from this topic for now. Maybe we'll talk about this in a different at a different time.
If you would like to know what we really think, make sure you're on the email list at stillman-wellness.com, because we don't say everything that we think out loud on the social media platforms where this is streaming, because we tend to be punished by the thought police.
Right. And follow me on Instagram, nutritional_analytics. I get a little more spicy in my stories and that sort of thing that can't be tracked as well. So
that's great. That's a good transition. We had a couple questions about aluminum this week. Someone was asking that she had been a painter for 35 years. Could that be contributing to her high levels of aluminum?
1,000%, depending upon what's in the pigments and how she interacted with them. I mean, a lot of painters, I don't know. I hope they teach people this, but you're not.
You've got some pretty intimate knowledge of painters and artists, don't you, Dr.
Me? Why?
Well, your mom, worked with a famous artist.
Yes.
Yeah.
My mother was Ansel Adams's editor, so she's
Oh,
actually
wow.
the author
Wow.
of most of the Ansel Adams books you'll see out there. Andrea
Wow.
Stillman. Yeah.
That is
So yeah, Ansel did definitely spend a lot of time in the dark room, and he used very heavy silver.
Right.
Part of why people like his photography is that the silver creates this very powerful image. It looks glossy. It looks shiny.
Right.
And so black and white photography with real silver is just incredible. It's visually very striking. And because he was doing black and white photography in like the mountains of California with these very stark visual contrasts, he was able to just create these very evocative images. Anyway, yeah. We don't test silver on our tests, do we, Clark? I just realized that.
We don't. But to your point about pigments, really quickly here, in aluminum is used in permanent eyeliner pigment.
Get out.
So, all these women that are drawing on their eyebrows, they're injecting aluminum into their skin, unfortunately. So it's
I tell a story often about, it's just in so many things. Like we had a case where a woman was getting a horrible autoimmune skin condition. She lived in a cold, dark state without a lot of sun exposure, and yet her dermatologist told her to wear sunscreen every single day that contained aluminum. And she stopped using that. She started doing what we recommended for diet and lifestyle. She didn't even do mineral balancing. And last I checked, all of her problems had gone away.
Wow.
I know. So, it's remarkable where aluminum goes and what it does to people. And it's in everything. But anyway, paints. I'm sure it's in paints. I'm sure it could make people sick. I hope they teach people not to do things like lick the brush that's been inundated with the metal pigment. That's how hatters. People may know the nursery rhyme or the saying "mad as a hatter." Mad as a hatter refers to the ancient. Oh my gosh, it's not that old. The 1800s, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century practice of using mercury to cure furs for hats that would then be made and were in fashion at the time in Europe and America. And so the hatters would use these mercury-based products to do that, and then they would lick the brushes in order to get them the point right, and they would just ingest huge amounts of mercury that made them absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
And people are doing that with their cosmetics, and then they get better when you get them on safe, natural cosmetics that are not loaded with all that garbage.
And another point about the pigments, like aluminum could potentially be used, but we know that cadmium, lead, and mercury are very prominently used in a lot of different pigments. So there's cadmium yellows, there's cadmium reds, there's mercury reds, lead reds that are used for not only makeups, hair dyes, but paint pigments as well, and colors.
We just saw some very big cadmium eliminations in a couple people.
Yep.
That's great. Let's take a couple of these aluminum questions from the chat. So first, what does Chris Exley recommend for mitigating aluminum's toxic effects on the body?
Yeah, Exley recommends that people drink a silica-based water, like either Fiji or this really great water from Malaysia called Acylus, which is just silica spelled backwards. That's his recommendation for most people. I think using that in combination with a mineral balancing program, sauna therapy, and other detoxification modalities, very nutrient-dense diet, that's really the way that you want to deal with aluminum toxicity.
They put horsetail. Horsetail is an herb that's rich in silica. I put horsetail in Dr. Stillman's detox powder, which is a do-it-yourself, assembled at home product that I created because I really didn't like any of the greens powders that were being recommended online. That protocol is in the memberships at Stillman Wellness, so people can go join the membership, get access to our Q&As, get access to our webinars, and they can get access to that protocol as well as where I source my herbs, which is a very special company.
Nice.
So, yeah. All right.
The next question.
Go ahead. Next question.
Since aluminum is completely foreign to natural physiological processes, why is it able to replace beneficial minerals with ionic mimicry?
Hello, Tom. Good to see you. Thank you for asking. This is really more, it's a great question. Yeah, really, this is more a matter not of why does this phenomena exist in biology, but more this is just the quantum nature of matter. So the more similar elements are to one another, the more they're going to tend to be incorporated into the same systems, because the body can't necessarily tell the difference. And so molecular mimicry isn't really a principle or a function of biological systems that they intelligently engage in. It's more a function of just the nature of the quantum interactions of materials with each other.
Yeah, ionic mimicry doesn't necessarily explain why that process happens, which is a broader, even more philosophical question of a lot of enzymes and a lot of systems in the body evolved without this substrate specificity, actually as an adaptive mechanism to keep life going in the face of like a deficiency or something of any given element. So on metalloenzymes, a lot of different elements can be used. And in some ways, like the metals are used as short-term adaptive mechanisms to keep those enzymes going where there is like a significant mineral imbalance or deficiency. And so that's sort of like the secondary aspect of ionic mimicry. The first is that the metals can gain access to cellular compartments through these mineral channels and transporters because the physiochemical characteristics of the metals and the minerals are similar, very similar in many ways in some instances. So like aluminum is, physiochemically similar to silica, calcium, magnesium, and iron, right? There's other elements that even aluminum could substitute for, but just not with a high degree of avidity or specificity, but where there are more similar chemical characteristics like electronegativity, valence configuration, ionic radii, where there is more similarity in those chemical characteristics, those physiochemical characteristics, the metals can substitute more readily for those minerals.
Next question. Where in the brain has Exley's research shown, I'm assuming aluminum, to accumulate?
Well, it's sort of interesting. In Alzheimer's disease, it seems as though aluminum accumulates, and I believe this is correct, I could have it in the reverse, but aluminum accumulates in the extracellular spaces in the glia in Alzheimer's. In autism, it accumulates in the intracellular spaces. So there's not only like a distribution quotient for where the metals go in the body broadly, but in subcellular and cellular compartments, there are different, there's different compartments of the cell itself. Sometimes it can accumulate in the cytosol or the mitochondria. And so that is an area, I think, of more future research that needs to be elaborated on more so. There isn't actually any research on that, or it's a very sparse research on that. So very interesting, though, to think about, where aluminum accumulates and what it ultimately leads to, like clinically.
Mm-hmm. Question on, what are your thoughts on colloidal silver?
I think there's a question above that, Amy, that we keep skipping over.
Which one?
It's this one.
Oh, yeah. I was going to go back to this, but we can start there if you want.
Oh, I figure, yeah, we go in order. I mean, that's what I thought. So, Clark, thoughts on TMG?
TMG is phenomenal as a methyl donor, trimethylglycine, right? And, typically
huge waves, probably 6 months ago, when Gary Brecka talked about giving Dana White. Dana White actually talked about it, I think, before Gary did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they talked about using TMG to help Dana, I believe it was TMG, to help him with his high blood pressure. And I actually just took on a case of a gentleman with a high homocysteine level who I'm sure methylation will be at the heart of his case. But what I think people don't understand about the methylation process is this particular case. I know this gentleman has a high burden of mercury. He's actually had objectively elevated levels on blood testing. This is not like a, you just have a lot in your hair case. And so the thing that people don't realize about methylation is that the methylation cycle can be co-opted, destroyed, derailed by heavy metals through interference with the pathways due to the metalloenzyme reliance of that pathway or those pathways, but also due to the extreme oxidative stress that then puts a huge load on the methylation cycle, where glutathione is just being soaked up by these heavy metals as the body tries to use it as a reducing equivalent for the free radicals coming off of them, which is why, the free radical theory of aging really didn't pan out. We don't see, and that theory, for those people who've never heard of it, is essentially that if we just quench all the free radicals that the body makes with antioxidants like vitamin A and vitamin E and melatonin, people won't age. That doesn't work. We tried that. It failed. It's really more about maintaining mitochondrial function, which goes back to a lot of other things, which is why we talk about them so much when we talk about the metals. But again, the most toxic things in nature for mitochondria are heavy metals, short, again, of things like chemical warfare agents.
Right.
So
there's another interesting angle here with respect to like folate, methylation, and like arsenic specifically. Not well known, but folate is required for the enzyme that changes arsenic from its inorganic form to its organic form, right? And so if you have a higher arsenic burden, that could be taxing that system. It could be taxing folate. I don't know exactly the mechanisms there, but there could be issues with folate metabolism that may be thought of as a genetic issue or polymorphism driving the higher requirement for folate. But it might not actually be that. It might just be arsenic toxicity.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So did we answer Gabrielle's question though? What do you
TMG, yeah. I mean, the benefits are that it improves the methylation pathways, which is very important for heavy metal detoxification. So that's primarily why we're using it. The dosages can vary anywhere from about 1,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day. It's also, glycine is sort of like a calming amino acid in its own right. So its activation of the parasympathetic is pretty important for activation.
A lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would do 750 twice a day personally to start someone.
Yeah.
And then, I might use lower doses if someone was sensitive to it. And many people can probably go up, but you will run into the phenomenon of overmethylation. That's really fun to see. Those people feel irritable, grouchy, on edge. They may not be able to sleep.
Sounds like
oxidations. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover with people who are pushing out or detoxifying the body and going through a healing crisis. So it's a really interesting. It's interesting, but usually I've seen that happen with people who are using creatine and TMG and they're taking huge doses of EV. It doesn't tend to be something that shows up because you just took one methylation factor. There's people I've seen with who've got different SNPs where they're really sensitive to things like, say, B12 or folate or whatever, but not often.
Interesting. There's also some interesting literature that I read about some fish have higher levels of betaine as an adaptation to metals in the ocean, which I found to be very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, back to this question. So would you mind reviewing again the relationship between high ferritin levels, low testosterone, and the connection to heavy metals?
So this is really interesting to me because I got into minerals, and along the way I got really interested in iron because it's the most abundant transition element in the body by a country mile. There's 3 to 5 grams of iron in the adult human body who's not deficient, obviously, and who's not floridly iron overloaded. And again, I've done a lot of content on that. I can't rehash all that here, but there's 3 to 5 grams of iron in the average human. There's like 120 milligrams of copper, for example. There's 18 milligrams of magnesium. That's why magnesium is one of the macro minerals, we call them: calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. There's dozens of grams of those or thereabouts. But the next most abundant is iron, and below that are things like copper that are only a couple hundred milligrams or whatever. And the reason that's so important is it means that the vast majority of oxidative stress in the body is being created by iron, which is why, anecdotally at least, I've seen that if you don't take care of iron overload in people, you will only get some results in terms of balancing their other minerals. But anyway, as iron accumulates in the body and iron overload, it tends to accumulate in the brain, which is why these people get mood issues, they get dementia. If I'm screening a family for this, I'm asking questions like, did anyone have early onset or early issues in life with addiction, with memory, with mood disorders, with psychiatric illnesses. That's not as well reported in the literature, but that's partly because iron overload is a kind of niche issue. And then because it causes basically aging writ large, I ask about early cancers, heart disease, because what happens with iron overload is people will end up with like elevated hemoglobin A1Cs, metabolic disorders, dementia, psychiatric disturbances, heart disease, cancers, you name it. And one of these things that happens to them is their sex steroid hormone numbers drop because of iron accumulation in the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which then activates the testicles to create testosterone. Mm-hmm. So as iron goes up, testosterone tends to come down. Now, there's a chicken or the egg issue here because testosterone also, while it controls metals, you'll see men who have low testosterone levels start testosterone and drop their ferritin by, 1,000 or more, which is insane. Those men didn't necessarily have iron overload. They had iron and heavy metals that were out of control because the testosterone was not present to control them. And that's one of the reasons I suspect that people today are flocking more and more to hormone replacement therapy or testosterone replacement therapy. Men are finding that because they're heavy metal burden, they need more testosterone than their fathers and grandfathers did in order to be the same man because of all these interference from heavy metals, which are known endocrine disrupting compounds. This isn't just some kooky theory. This is really laid down in the medical literature. So as the iron accumulates in these glands in the brain that control testosterone production, it's really interesting. The way I think about it is the voltage of the gland drops. And in real terms, the aging of cells is about the drop in the potential across the mitochondrial membrane. As that potential drops, the health of the mitochondria deteriorates, their ability to generate energy and water and CO2 declines. And with that, you see a reduction in the function of the cell.
Right.
So when you start to get rid of heavy metals and get rid of iron, that's why those people can make, I don't know how if I've never had a case of hemochromatosis where they actually were in florid iron overload and they had low T testosterone, that is. But I would be surprised if by mobilizing all these heavy metals out of that axis, you were able to restore some endogenous hormone production. But I not seen it, so I'm not going to speculate. Well, I will speculate, but it's speculation, and I'm being clear about it.
Even more reason to do HTMA and mineral balancing. So
it is.
Before we jump into
we know that ferritin is a very good indicator of inflammation at times, and so metals are the most inflammatory agents that we're exposed to on a daily basis. So I don't think it's a huge leap to say very high ferritin levels might be associated with heavy metals. Heavy metals are associated with lower testosterone and sometimes an imbalance in the testosterone to estrogen ratio because of heavy metals' ability to stimulate estrogen receptors as well. So that's been demonstrated. They call heavy metals estrogen mimics. And that speaks to this other concept of molecular mimicry, where metals can not only mimic minerals, ionic mimicry, but they can mimic endogenous biomolecules as well, things that are made inside. So that I think is interesting. And there's some research looking at, say, mercury toxicity inhibits conversion of pregnenolone to progesterone and other steroid hormones. So, metals, there's multiple vectors that metals can influence inflammation, and therefore I think skew ferritin and iron in a variety of ways. That's the thing that's so difficult about all of this. It's you can't pinpoint just one thing that the metals are doing. There's a range of effects that usually is occurring at the exact same time, right? So how do you quantify that? Diseases and conditions are really the accumulated toxicity and the totality of all the mineral imbalances. Very rarely you have magnesium deficiency, therefore you have this disease, right? In over deficiency disease states, you might have a goiter because of iodine deficiency, but these deficiencies and toxicities take a subclinical form and they go together and they accumulate over time.
Great. Next question. What are your thoughts on BHRT and breast cancer risk in postmenopausal women?
We will be tackling that topic over at my blog, which now includes a podcast. The podcast is coming up. We're going to start it this August. That's stillmanmd.substack.com. We will be going over a book called Estrogen Matters, where it's all about this topic. Basically, the supposed link, well, if you use bioidentical hormones to replace hormone levels in men and women, there's no evidence of risk. And in fact, there's an abundance of evidence of benefit. All of the evidence that bioidentical hormones increases morbidity and mortality is it being extrapolated really from data that was generated with fundamentally unnatural hormones that have no place, in my opinion, in the human body.
Right.
So we use bioidentical hormones all the time, and the literature is just not there to support a link between them and breast cancer. And that's what's really sad, is that the vast majority of physicians are still woefully behind on that literature. So.
To sort of bring together the two topics that we've been talking about today, antiperspirant use is associated with breast cancer, and actually did some research on that.
Fascinating. Did not know that.
Yep. And that's because of aluminum.
I wonder if that's not in Estrogen Matters. I don't think that's in the book. I'm going to look at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, back to the colloidal silver topic. So what are your thoughts on
So this is a harmless over-the-counter supplement, at least in the United States. It's not going to hurt anyone with intermittent use. But what I see people doing with minerals and mineral supplements is they'll just go crazy forever. And they have no respect for the fact that this is an incredibly, incredibly delicate system that relies upon natural ratios of inputs and demand that have been disrupted by our modern world, the stresses we face, the lifestyles we live, the changes in our soil biochemistry, our food. Our food looks nothing like it did 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, before the advent of modern agricultural methods. And so when we constantly get people in the practice who are struggling with their health, and they're taking something like massive doses of beef liver, or they're taking huge doses of, copper, or colloidal this or colloidal that, and it's
oregano oil or other herbal stuff.
A lot of it's just being thrown around by practitioners and influencers who have no earthly idea how complicated this system is, and how amazing the results are that you can get when you honor that complexity instead of fighting it and trying to over engineer it, which is just kind of absurd.
We talked about this yesterday. It's like people do have this urge or instinct to like throw a bunch of things on top of mineral balancing, and I don't think that works. I think silver can be used like intermittently if you've got an active infection or something. It's been shown to be helpful for that as a remedy. But yeah, using it consistently and in high doses, there's actually a story of a guy that I used to work in a health food store many years ago, like 10 years ago or something. And this guy was blue because he overdid on silver.
It's called argyria.
Yeah. So, got to be careful with these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this next one is a lot of questions at once, so we'll do one at a time.
Okay.
When is taurine recommended and not recommended?
I find that taurine is a very calming amino acid, and so I don't give it to someone who's already feeling very exhausted. But it is also... your sulfur-based amino acid load will predicate a lot of your ability to deal with stress and toxic exposures because of how sulfur runs into a lot of these pathways we've been talking about, including methylation, glutathione, chelating enzymes like metallothioneins. So I love adding taurine because I'm confident that sulfur is going to help people cope with modern life, heavy metals, etc. But it can be a little bit it can bring people down a little bit too much.
The way that I like to use it is primarily for people in 4 lows, and especially sympathetic dominance, where the activation of the sympathetic nervous system is chronic and a bit much. And so to your point about taurine being a calming amino acid, we can use it in those patterns, I think, more effectively to calm people down.
Next question. What do you think is the best way to get B vitamins? From food or a B complex, supplementation, or injections? Does it matter with the MTHFR gene? When can B vitamins make people feel worse?
Go ahead, Clark.
Yeah, we delineate in mineral balancing and using a heritage mineral analysis whether or not we give a lot of supplemental B vitamins based on the oxidation rate. Slow oxidizers require more, and supplemental, right? There's a delineation we should also make between, do you need high doses of supplemental of nutrients in supplement form versus how, just your baseline threshold of what you should be getting in your diet. And so everyone needs B vitamins. There's those nutritional requirements for a reason. But in mineral balancing, what we're sort of delineating is, do we use high dose B vitamin therapy for this group of people versus that group of people? B vitamins, broadly speaking, have a very powerful effect on the sodium and potassium readings on a hair test. So if you are in fast oxidation, taking a lot of supplemental B vitamins is going to be very harmful for you and could keep you in fast oxidation, could make the oxidation rate even faster than it is. So I actually had that exact experience early on, and before I started mineral balancing, I was under this impression that B vitamins were phenomenal for stress. They're anti-stress nutrients, and I was like under a lot of stress and felt really bad. I was in fast oxidation. I experimented with high doses of B complexes, and I felt infinitely worse. So, that sort of a lot of these small things over time, sort of clued me in and directed me towards mineral balancing. And then these ideas in mineral balancing made a lot of sense because I experientially had corroborated some of these things just in my own life. And so fast oxidation, slow oxidation, that's this sort of major determinant of whether or not we use a lot of B vitamins or not. But that doesn't mean you don't need B vitamins as a fast oxidizer. You still should be eating foods that have, that are rich in B vitamins. But the question of whether we use them supplementally or not is really a matter of assessing the oxidation rate.
Yes, I agree with all that. And it's been fascinating before I did mineral balancing, we did tons and tons of different functional medicine supplement protocols. I experimented with all kinds of B vitamins, saw all kinds of different things at different practices I worked at. And I basically arrived at the conclusion that most people a lot of people just are either stuck or going through a phase where they just throw high doses of B vitamins at people because they've seen them get great results. But what they don't understand is that they can drive people's physiology into a place that ultimately makes them worse. I mean, any idiot can throw B vitamins and minerals and things at people and make them feel like they have more energy and they've got more vitality and whatever. But we see that ending in them eventually saying, now I can't sleep, or now I'm completely dependent upon these B vitamins. And when I don't take them, I feel like, I've got a hangover. What's wrong with me? So that's where the mineral balancing, you seamlessly transition people onto and off of B vitamins. I can't remember a time when someone said to me, because of how we do the mineral protocols and how we use the doses or what doses we use, I can't remember a time when someone said, I really felt like I was dragging when I went on to my next protocol. There's always a smooth transition, unless they take a supplement holiday and they notice that the protocol was still really working for them. There's this smooth transition through from one protocol to another, even though the B vitamin levels may vary. And that's part of what makes these protocols so profound in terms of how they optimize physiologic function.
Next question. Is donating blood regularly every 2 to 3 months usually enough to keep iron levels in check?
So this is going to depend case to case because it's going to depend what iron overload or iron retention metabolism genes you have. So like I've got 1 out of 2 genes positive for hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, which means that I tend to accumulate iron faster than the average person, but not as fast as someone with 2 copies of the gene. So I've been donating blood for every 2 months, like clockwork, for almost 2 years now. and I have never been anemic, and I've never had a low iron level. I mean, I'm not checking my iron levels actively, but I don't even notice when I donate blood, other than that I feel sort of vaguely better. And so this is going to vary widely. You know, are you a elderly person with hemorrhoids? Are you a young woman who's menstruating? Are you a mother of 2? Are you a mother of, you know, today I talked to a woman who's on her 10th pregnancy, you know? So no one can tell you, I know, right? No one can tell you how often you're going to have to donate blood. I mean, it's too specific. But that being said, many men can do every 2 to 3 months without ever becoming anemic, just like I am.
Yeah, I do think there's a place for that. And, you know, I'm kind of like the mineral balancing supremacist, and I always say mineral balancing.
Mineral balancing.
That's the solution to every problem. I do think, you know, trying to keep iron levels in check. We talked about particular mechanisms where metals affect iron metabolism. So sure. You also want to have a comprehensive approach. And
you donate blood, Clark?
I don't. No, never have.
Maybe you should try it.
I don't know. You know, we'll see. Maybe someday. I don't know.
Just throwing it out there.
Okay, so I have one last question here. It's from someone in the HTMA program, and she's wanting to learn more about HTMA, kind of actually learning some deeper concepts here. So do you have any book recommendations if someone's wanting to learn about HTMA? And where's a good place to start for someone like me? I'm already in the HTMA program with you guys.
Oh, cool. I think we sort of shifted gears a little bit before, and I don't know if we're currently offering this, but there was a long book list that we had put together for the prior practitioner training. Let's make sure that we get this person that book list. There's a lot of different books. I would start with Dr. Wilson's book, Nutritional Balancing and Hair Mineral Analysis. That's what it was titled before. I think it's called Development and Development Programs is the new title, the new editions. But that book is sort of like I would say, Bible of good HTMA interpretation and mineral balancing. There's a few other niche books out there that are, sort of technical. Metals toxicology books will satisfy that itch if you really want technical information on the interactions between the metals and the minerals and that sort of thing. But for someone that's just starting out, Dr. Wilson's book is still kind of like a textbook. It's like 700 pages, so that should probably be enough, I think, for you for now.
And then if someone's not in the HTMA program, talk a little bit about that, how they can learn about it. They can learn through your HTMA program, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we put out this course called HTMA Secrets. It's a video course where we go over a bunch of different health conditions and how we view them through the lens of mineral balancing and HTMA. And so that's actually, I think, maybe a better primer for people that don't want to read a 700-page textbook. There's, I think, 7 to 10 hours of footage in there of Dr. Stillman and I going over these health conditions and how we think about them through the lens of HTMA and mineral balancing. That's a phenomenal resource as well. And, really, in my opinion, I think it's a lot deeper. You're going to get not only some good introductory information on HTMA and mineral balancing, but I think we go a lot deeper than a lot of other practitioners.
We go a lot deeper. It's a lot more comprehensive. You won't find anything else out there like it. So I just posted the link to our waiting list. The waiting list is where you can go to sign up for the waiting list for the course with coaching that we offer periodically. And then you can, if you just sign up for the waiting list, you'll also be on our email list. So you'll find out when it's open. The people who buy the HTMA course alone, just the standalone, the episodes that Clark and I have filmed, the people who buy that get the first dibs on the next round of course and coaching. So make sure that you do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
That's all the questions we have for today.
Good to see everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Get outside and avoid Mr. Aluminum.